even with your own. And the one thing I feel strongly about is, I was in South Sudan a couple of weeks ago, where the UN and concern has been told that there is an austerity budget on South Sudan, despite the massive increase now in needs. In Pakistan, the team said to me, the USAID is offering us another 3.8 million, and it's a drop in the ocean to comparison to what has been before. And the huge challenge is to trying to get the message out to the public, essentially, and the donors, that investment in this is critical. We struggle within concern about what is the right image. And Oxfam said to me a couple of years ago, you can't continuously put out images of negativity. It disempowers the people. And I said, but if you're in a feeding centre and you are faced with looking at a child who is dying, tell me the image that honestly represents that. And we are quite sensitive about ensuring dignity, but also trying to get a message across. And it is hugely, we're competing much more now with people whose interest span is less. I feel the Concern's role, and Tom has led us in this for the last 11 years, is not that we are more muted by partnerships with increasing donor funding, is in fact actually what the public wants to hear is persuasive evidence and collaboration, and evidence that what we're doing on the ground is an investment rather than just a band-aid. And it is only through collaboration with donors, with private sector, with local organizations that this is possible. So collaboration for me is not about muting, it's not about standing protesting outside the UN, it's about developing powerful persuasive evidence that actually transforms people's views. So, I don't know if the question is there.
I'm not sure how much we disagree, but like going back to the history of this, I think there was a kind of a bureaucratic imperative to move in a particular direction, and it's because people we know respond very generously when there are disasters, be they earthquakes or tsunamis or famines. People are and the NGOs have always taken advantage of that. But the point is they do not happen with the kind of regularity that sustains the bureaucracy and that pays the bills. So there's a tension there. And that tension has probably increased as famines have become less serious. And I think it's also that tension that has led in the past for some of the NGOs to exaggerate how serious the famines are. And then almost silently take the credit for something which really wasn't as bad as they claimed. So that is, and I think also, this is not, I think, a value judgment, it's just a commentary on the way things work out. You could see why these organizations become semi-nationalized, and that they tend to rely on state funding rather than on private funding. And I think, in a way, there is something lost, because there was something innocent about relying on people's generosity and volunteering and so on. And these institutions have become more professionalized, more kind of, they become more anonymous, they become bureaucracies. And, just maybe they need to do that. And they do a lot of good things. But I still think there are tensions there. And I still think there are questions to be asked about, how much should you go away from where you started? And how closely linked should you be to government, be it international or your own government, And this also, I think, has a bearing on how much should the NGOs themselves differentiate their products, or should Irish NGOs want to become like British NGOs? Should they start competing with British NGOs, which seems to be happening now, and I don't particularly like that. But there is the sense that they want to become bigger and bigger and bigger, and that they are competing. I mean, there was an account in the Times there, I guess it was the day I was flying over, about tensions between one of the NGOs and Oxfam. And the complaint was, people know Oxfam, they don't know us. And it's as if, these agencies are competing for market share. They are advertising, and it's not that the spend will increase, but they are competing among themselves, like businesses would, for a share of the market. So maybe I'm a bit sentimental about these things and idealistic, but they worry me.
David, may I
Yeah.
ask you to?
May I simply say that you can dispute the claims about concern. I'm not enough of an expert on concern to talk about this. But the idea, first of all, that a government that has important foreign policy goals globally that include making war on people, that you can take their money and not be in some way influenced by them. I mean, in that sense, Ireland, it seems to me, is a very special case. You are an EU country, and to some extent, you're a neutral country. You are not the United States or France or Brazil. You are not going to use your humanitarian aid to get contracts to pursue war aims. I mean, you're speaking as if different national NGOs could somehow be disaggregated from what is a global humanitarian system. And it can't be. I mean, the Director General was talking about coordination. Well, coordination, among other things, involves coordination with the big donors. The big donors have lots of other agendas besides saying it's the moral imperative, as the ambassador said, or whatever. I mean, so, and if you look at USAID right now, you'll see that there are two USAIDs now. There's the funder that funds programs in the battle space of the long war. And there's the funder that does everything else. And those things, talk to people in Pakistan. You can track over the last 5 years, movements of, AID requests for proposals and correlate them with the movement of the battle space. So, I mean, look, it's not to sort of go 180 degrees in the other direction and say NGOs are just creatures of imperialism or something. But it is to say that, excuse me, you can't just say, you can't use the Irish example as the major example for thinking about this problem. And you have to admit that humanitarian aid, development, forget about the problem of emergency relief versus development. USAID, the US government generally, is doing both relief and development in the battle space, collaborating with major NGOs, global NGOs, not only US NGOs. And if you want the ultimate proof of that, look at something called, in Afghanistan, the provincial reconstruction teams, which are mixed military, humanitarian, that is military NGOs. There's one humanitarian system. You can't have a whole bunch of them. And you can try to get a niche for yourself as Ireland, as the Irish state, as concern, as whoever, that's fine. But the idea that if we're talking about humanitarianism, about fighting hunger, et cetera, that's a non-starter. The other point I really want to make is, you know perfectly well, you know probably better than I do, that all kinds of appeals depend on emergencies. And the idea that perhaps, forget it, the appeal depends on the emergency, the success of the appeal depends on the exaggeration. That's the world we actually live in. And if that weren't true, you wouldn't have NGOs duplicating other NGOs' work in those crises where you can get money. So tsunami, Rwanda, going all the way back. There's one crisis that you can really raise money on, and everybody does it. Everybody, yourselves included.
Well, what I would like to say is that only in an Irish conference could you talk about the history of hunger and end with the future of the non-profit sector. So, I would like to thank our distinguished panel. Each of them have brought a different element to it. There will be sandwiches in the back. We have about 45 minutes for lunch before we go on to panel 2 and panel 3. Please grab the distinguished panelists for private questions, etc. And thank you very much for your attendance.